And now, let's move to old Europe, but not to old speakers. I'm going to introduce Gerhard Steger. I don't go too far saying that Gerhard was a father to the budget reform in Austria. He has been served for many years as the budget director, and presently is Director General at Finances and Sustainability at the Court of Audit in Austria. So I would invite him to give his presentation, please.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Buongiorno and good morning. It's a pleasure for me to provide you with the Austrian experience on accrual accounting and budgeting. And as I mentioned before, I'm not just talking about accrual accounting, because accrual accounting is nice and is a precondition for accrual budgeting. But if you really want to change things, if you really want to influence things, put it in the budget. Otherwise, you would not have a steering effect. And that's why we in Austria do accrual accounting, yes, and accrual budgeting. And I hate these barriers. I go there. No, yeah, the mic works. Okay, that's great. First of all, I want to get across is we started on the central government level. And we started last year, 2013. And now we see that the subnational governments are moving in our direction. Actually, we negotiate with them to one standard, to come to one standard for central government level, regional government level, local government level. We hope that we will finalize the negotiations until the end of this year. And that would mean that we would not have only the central government doing accrual accounting and budgeting, but having regional and local governments doing the same. We take Ipsos's orientation. We apply 20 standards fully. 7 standards are not necessary to apply in Austria because we don't have such problems. So 5 are remaining, and we deviate in 5 standards, more or less. We have a pragmatic approach. We don't want to be perfect, because if you are perfect, you create a bureaucratic monster. We try to focus on the most important things to steer the budget, to steer public finances. I don't say keep it simple and stupid, but almost. Almost. Focus on the most important things. What's important to understand is Parliament, as we do accrual budgeting as well, Parliament receives a cash flow statement and an operating statement and decides on both of them. And then my institution, the Court of Audit, the Supreme Audit Institution, compiles the annual financial statement after the year is finished. We have approved this reform in Parliament unanimously. All parties in Parliament voted for the reform. And this is very, very important because, you know, government change. But the reform should stay. And therefore, it's important that everybody was on board when we decided on the reform. We even changed the Constitution to open the window for accrual accounting and budgeting. It took us several years for deciding, implementing, training, and so on and so forth. And the external costs, you know, here in Europe, concerning EPSAs, Alexander will I think, elaborate on this. There are horror figures what the implementation of accruals would cost. This is nonsense. We needed 30 million euros. That's a bunch of resources, I know that. But it's far away from the horror figures that are transported actually from those who have fear moving to accruals. I now turn to the question, what are the merits of accruals? Accrual is not a technical exercise. Accrual is a cultural change. I want to get across one thing. If you switch to accruals, you see risk potentials for public finances that you don't see if you have cash only. And I want to give you some examples. One example is contingent liabilities. You don't see them in a cash flow statement. But if you have an operating statement, you have to build provisions. And we do that in Austria. We have provisions for guarantees, cost of pending litigation, as far as the public staff is concerned. We have vacation entitlements, provisions for severance payments. So we show, hey guys, there's something that could materialize into the budget within the next years. Another example is doubtful receivables. If you should get money, but you don't get it, you'll never see it in a cash flow statement. You need an operating statement, and there you have to reflect the risks. You have to do write-downs or adjustments of value if you don't get taxes that you should get, for instance. And we do that in our budget. And you see the figures here on the slides. These are relatively high figures, so we have relatively high risks in that respect. So accruals disclose financial risks, which are not disclosed in a cash-only statement. Of course, this phenomenon I'm talking now about will never happen in your countries, but we do it. Order now, pay later. One typical example is the Austrian railway infrastructure. We order it now, we build it now, and we pay it throughout the next 30 to 50 years. If you just have a cash flow statement, you just see what you pay in the respective year, and as far as the year 2013 is concerned, we paid 1.6 billion euro, and that is in a cash flow statement. Okay. But if you look at the operating statement, you see now what you have never seen in the past, that we built 2.9 billion euros, almost double the figure than the cash figure. That budget burden would have never, ever materialized in a cash-only world. So it's important to know that. It's important to show the risk factors, the budget burden that you create, which will materialize within the next years. Another example, investment. In a cash-only world, you allocate the cost of investment to one single year, the expenditure, while you don't take into account useful economic life, you don't take into account depreciation. In other words, you don't allocate the investment according to the useful economic life, which would be the realistic way to do it economically. And another very important issue, if you sell an asset, simple minds are happy because they receive money. What they don't see is that the asset goes away. And if you have cash only, you produce such fiscal illusions because you just show the revenue coming in. You never show the asset going away. So if a country is richer or poorer than a year ago or than 2 years ago, you never see that in a cash flow statement. You need an operating statement, you need a balance sheet, and that's why we move to accruals. This is our balance sheet. You can't read it, of course. I just cite one figure, balance sheet at the end of the year 2013, federal level, central government level. Just one figure, deeply red, net assets, minus 141 billion euros. This is a bad picture. Hey, but it's necessary to know it. We have not known that before. So we now see we have to do something. We see the crocodiles behind us, or before us, or around us. So we have to move quickly. You don't see that if you have a cash-only statement. So therefore, this gives, a necessary incentive for stakeholders, for decision makers to move. Finally, the challenges of accruals. I've now talked lots about the merits of accruals. I now move to the challenges of accruals. And one question, I think, from the colleague from Tanzania focused on the challenges. First challenge, without backing from political level and senior administrative level, you are lost. Forget it. Yeah? You would simply go nowhere. So you need commitment on a political level, on a senior administrative level. But that means you have to explain them why accruals are necessary and helpful. If you have politicians that don't like transparency, you will have a problem introducing accruals. If you have politicians that don't want to know where they stand, you would have problems introducing accruals. Accruals is about telling the truth. Second challenge, you have lots of stakeholders that don't know how to read a balance sheet and how to use this information. So you have to train people. You have to inform people. You never can inform enough. I completely agree with my colleague from Abu Dhabi who mentioned that communication is key. Training, 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 communication, communication until you are fed up, until there. You can't hear it any longer, but you never can communicate enough. Okay? Next point is complexity threatens transparency. I already talked about bureaucratic monsters. Therefore, we focus on the most important issues. We don't try to be perfect. We don't try to do every exercise, even if we get not very friendly letters from one professor or the other professor. We don't care so much about professors. We care about changing the real financial life of the country. Okay? Standardization is, of course, crucial. And I'm very grateful to have Ipsos as the lighthouse for us to go ahead. And then, ladies and gentlemen, IT. IT is a crucial factor. Without IT, you can't implement accruals, but take care of the IT people. Not because they wouldn't be professional, of course they are. Not because they would not try to be helpful, of course they try to be helpful. The problem is they think differently. And you really have to align very closely budget people, accounting people, and IT people to make sure that everybody understands the same thing when we talk about problems and solving the problems. We in Austria had a weekly sure fix, weekly, between accounting people, budget people, and IT people to make sure that everybody has the same idea in the head, okay? And even then, we succeeded only to 98% and not to 100%. You can never do enough in that respect. So have a close eye on IT people. They are nice guys, but they need guidance, okay? Finally, ladies and gentlemen, this is my last sentence. As I mentioned before, accruals is not a technical exercise. Accrual is a cultural change towards accountability, a cultural change towards transparency, a cultural change towards the knowledge where we stand and where we have to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gerhard, for your comprehensive presentation. No doubt that with Austria, we are at the real forefront of accounting reformers. And I did appreciate in your presentation the very clear way you used to show and to demonstrate value added by accrual accounting in terms of information to users. Thank you so much for this. The floor is now open for questions, so I'm sure, please. One or two questions from the audience are very welcome.
Good morning. My name is Robert Mull from the Dutch profession. Thank you for your powerful speech. Impressing. I had one question. On one of your first slides stated that the financial statements from the state are now compiled by the Supreme Audit Institute, the Court of Auditors. Did I understand it well? Yes. So who is left to audit these statements? Because normally that's a duty also for the Supreme Audit Institution.
Is the mic on? Yeah. You're right. Okay. We do that. We scrutinize the figures, and we give our opinion to Parliament, and Parliament at the end of the day decides if Parliament accepts a financial statement, yes or no. So we do the audit. Ministry of Finance compiles the figures. We check if the figures are correct, and then Parliament decides.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Please.
Hi, my question is, as you said, that maybe, the implementation of the accrual accounting is depend on the political system in the country. And do you think in our modern society, where we have legislative, executive, and justice system are independent or should be independent, do you think that an accounting body should be as independent as justice, as we know that accounting is crucial for our societies? That's my question.
I think we have an independent body, and that is the Court of Audit, or the Supreme Audit Institution. It just reports to Parliament. So I think it's the role of the Supreme Audit Institution to do just that. I think that's sufficient if the Court of Audit or the Supreme Audit Institution really works well. I think in my country this is the case, in lots of other countries as well. I think that's the main point.
As we are shifting to the EU case, I have a question for you, Gerhard, that I think makes sense at present in Europe. We can consider Austria as a successful case. I think you agree on this.
Hopefully, yeah.
And as far as I know, you followed a pragmatic, I would say a cautious approach to reform. I mean, the design of the reform took a very long time, and you studied other reform cases before starting implementation. The reform at the beginning did not apply for subnational levels of government, but now it is touching subnational level of governments. You use IPSAS as an orientation. So how much such an approach has impacted on the results? I mean, how much the results are dependent on such an approach in your experience?
Very much, because very much. What we did is we established an informal parliamentary committee before the Parliament decided on the reform, where all parties were represented. We didn't take care if they were in government or in opposition. We took everybody, because we want to immunize the reform towards changes, after changes of governments. And this committee met in a small room. All parties were represented. Ministry of Finance presented the reform ideas. Parties responded. We came back with new reform ideas. It was going back and forth. And after 3 years of this process without microphones, without cameras, just focusing on the issue, after 3 years, we got approval from every party in the room. Yes, we will vote in Parliament in favor of the reform. But it took us 3 years to convince parliamentarians. You can't do it in 1 month or in half a year. I think they must have time to understand why reform is necessary. What I told my minister, please don't say you are the reform champion. Because if you say that, the opposition would at the same moment say we are not in favor of that. So be modest, keep it cool, keep it low key, don't talk so much in public, talk more internally, try to convince stakeholders, and after the decision of Parliament, you can say you are the reform champion. That's fine. But so if you want to get everybody on board, you have to think with each other's head. That's my message.
Okay, thank you, Gerhard. We are going to keep your words as a good lesson to learn.